Hi everybody, my name is David and this is All Things Sacred. So here I am again. I just did 20 minutes on the human shadow and I would like to do a little bit more. I didn't feel it would be right to start this topic and not finish it, especially where I left it off. I was talking about a practice that one might do to kind of like start to recognize. I've seen lists, and I think I kind of agree. There's like four various stages one could go through with their experience of the shadow. The first, as we talked about, would be projection. And, this is a very negative state where one is not able to see their real self. They have such an uncomfortability with the vastness of their being, the vastness of their potential being, and they label certain qualities as negative, and they project these qualities out into the world around them, onto the people that they know. They'll see them as having these qualities so that they don't have to look at the qualities within themselves. And the point, and this is a major problem because it makes the person unable to be who they really are. It makes them fearful of expressing various aspects of their being, and it really cages them, their whole self. Even if they appear to be strong and proud and bold, courageous, if this is just a show, then their real self is hurting on the inside. And so a person needs to stop with this projection, uh, and turn it around. Really look at the projection, the projector, the person who's projecting all these things upon the screen that is their reality, because essentially this whole world then becomes a show for their own watching, which is true. This is a show for our own consciousness to enjoy. But when you become so entrapped by it, when you really believe the pictures on the screen, you enter into this false reality. You enter into a delusional state, and you project your qualities, you project yourself out in the world instead of actually being yourself, and it makes for a very unhappy experience. So the next step is for reflection. And I talked about a good exercise to recognize projection, which is by looking for those moments of projection, looking for their telltale signs of frustration or anger, a overwhelming feeling of negative emotion about anything out there in the world. And instead of dwelling on that feeling of negativity for the other, looking for that quality within yourself and finding how you also express and share with this other enemy these negative qualities, which brings you a little bit closer to them, which is a good thing, because we're trying to heal division in all people. And we need to heal that division within our own perspective first. But to talk about the personal shadow, so this is where you start to reflect. And it's good to do it in a moment like this, but I also had in one of the classes I went to, and I'm eventually going to be talking about a series of practices presented by Franz Barden, but I'm not going to get into that now. But one of the practices that was shared also in a school that I went to was called the soul mirrors. So you would start, you would essentially be doing this, but on a larger scale. And when I was presented with the exercise, I was told to make a list of at least 100 of my vices, and to make a list and then to label them, which are the worst, and which are not so bad. And it sounded to me, it sounded extreme at the time, but it really wasn't that hard. I was able to find 100 qualities about my sense of self at the time that I would label negative. And you begin to actively start working on these with various practices throughout the day, recognizing these qualities in yourself and finding the opposite quality, and starting to try to incorporate the other aspect. This was helpful in some ways, but just having the list, was probably the most helpful because it was a reflection. It was a mirror of the subconscious parts of my being. And it really gave me a chance to analyze and see these as parts of myself. The reason why it didn't necessarily help so much to just try to supplant these positive or these negative expressions with positive ones was because even though I had these qualities, just reflecting and finding them, I didn't feel like I completely owned them. I felt like I was like digging for them. It was easy to dig them out. Self-deprecating might have been on that list at the time, but so that might have made it a little bit easier. But I needed to really see and live those things for a moment, because a lot of times these were qualities that I would project outward, and because I already knew about this looking for projection, these were qualities I was like, okay, I need to admit that I do have these qualities, and so if I hadn't expressed certain ones, I found myself trying to delete them, but only having them come in my face more and more and more. And it was because I was refusing to integrate them. Even though I saw them as qualities that I would express, I didn't really fully feel that they were a part of my being. And I could have benefited at the time from just going a little bit hog wild. Be like, so this is my list of vices? Well, I'm going to let myself for just a moment, a day, I feel like might have been helpful, just a day, to be my viceful self and really own that persona and see what it brings me. To really, integrate that and see if any of the qualities that, or any of the desires that these viceful qualities were there for, if any of those desires were really useful. And, I'm sure that I would have found that they weren't. But the process of, and that's a very external process. That's not practice necessarily for everyone, because it can be very destructive for certain lifestyles, certain people. It can be very destructive to do something like that without the proper guidance. But the path that I took, did maybe incorporate that later on, and I might talk about that in future videos. But at the time, the path that I took really focused on introspection, on going beyond and trying to find a way to transmute these qualities. So that integration was a lot more psychological than it was in an exterior fashion. And I found that a lot of these vices would group up, and they seemed to stem from some similar aspect of myself that I wasn't wanting to admit to. And I would read these books, I would read all this philosophy, and I would listen to my teachers, and I would just wish that there was like this list that if you're angry, if that's your vice, then the light of it is going to be its exact opposite, and or rather, if you're angry, that's the fuel that you can use to transmute into drive, like I said. But it's not that simple. I realize, there's no cut one equals the other in the experience of the individual. And I found out that to really transmute a part of yourself, a viceful aspect of yourself, requires it not transmuting into necessarily a tit for tat like that with anger into drive, but rather that anger would, your attachment to not having that anger, to not being angry, so you're actually angry, and hiding that anger, your attachment to that whole play of the shadow self, when that would be integrated and transmuted, it wouldn't necessarily look like anything except your own ability to be yourself. And the best way that it's so the experience is very personal. And so the best way I have to share is giving my own personal experience, because you'll have these qualities and you'll want to start looking for the source of them. You can't just be like, oh, I'm angry. You have to be like, why am I angry? where does this anger stem from? Where does this, whatever quality it might be, where does this quality stem from? And in my experience, I found that a lot of my fear, because fear is always a big one, a lot of my fear, a lot of my frustration, a lot of my arrogance, a lot of my inability to connect with others at the time came from a single experience in my youth. I followed all of these back through my memories and found a moment when it was my first day in kindergarten. Yeah, my first day in kindergarten. And it was lunchtime. And when I was a child in my parents' home, we would always pray. We'd always put our hands together and we'd bow our heads before every meal. And when I went to, it was lunchtime in kindergarten, and I went to do that exact thing right before eating, and a little girl asked me, a classmate asked me, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm praying." I was so natural for me. I thought that it's what everyone did. And she laughed, or someone else asked. The experience was blown out of proportion in my mind, but eventually all the kids were laughing, and I was embarrassed. And I didn't have a single friend until I was in third grade, and then I had one friend until I was in fifth grade, and then I had friends, but I never realized how much that experience stuck with me. And it took me to remember this experience, and looking at it from the eyes of someone who was much older, and going back to my child self, and standing there, and telling him it's okay, sharing with him the wisdom that I have now. It feels so silly. It felt so silly at the time to be like, my actions have been dictated by this single event for so long. I thought I was so much bigger. I thought I was so much stronger. But I'm still just a kid in kindergarten who's getting laughed at by his classmates because he's doing something they don't understand. And with that understanding, I was able to find other events in my life, and possibly still do, that when I look at them from the new lens of my experience, I am able to cleanse those shadow parts of my being and become more me. So that my depression, when it disappeared, it did kind of become a joy. It became a happiness. And my anxiety became a type of calm when I was able to transmute it. So a lot of times they do look like, but it doesn't necessarily come by trying to replace one with the other. It comes by really finding the core of the experience, where it stems from, and healing that wound yourself so that you could heal your psychological issues, essentially. I wrote a few notes down, just a couple words, and that's because I would have forgotten this one. Sorry, one sec. I'm going to go grab a glass of water really quick. Sorry, a lot of talking. My voice is going out, but that water helped. So, yeah, I wrote down a few notes because I would have forgotten this one, and I didn't really understand it at the time. At the beginning of A Little Book on the Human Shadow is a note about taking this information seriously and using it for your own growth. And otherwise, it could become a dangerous thing. And the reason for that is because you could take this wisdom and you could use it to just prop up yourself. Normally you'll go out there and you'll project that, oh, that person is so this or that, right? They're so jealous or so hateful or so divisive or so whatever it might be. And that's what it is you'll be projecting. But there's there's a possibility that you might gain this wisdom about projection, and in your experiences with other people, you might be like, you're just projecting. You're just projecting right now and calling out other people, their shadow, when the whole point is to be introspecting, not to be using it as some sort of wisdom you have to belittle others. That then you take this very valuable and useful information and you turn it into something vicious and ugly. It's a heinous act, and it's a very real danger if when a person is inexperienced with introspection, is to take this quality of, well, I introspect, I reflect, ignore other people pretty much, focus and do your own work. And that's a small a little warning there about using this wisdom properly. And then the whole point of all of this, because this is kind of a different topic than what I normally talk about. I usually talk about things going towards very much a soul consciousness, a cosmic consciousness even. And how does this tie into that? Well, it ties into it because if you are still dealing with the subconscious blockages of really expressing your true personal, comfortable personality, who is able to be whatever they want. Kind of like a free personality, a personality that's free of its constraints of, oh, I'm always this way, or I'm always that way, or this makes me feel this way, and that makes me feel that way. When you're able to break free of those shackles, then you can start to enjoy first you get the chance to enjoy what it's like to be a free personality. And when you need something more, you're now able to start to see what the real world is all about. You're able to see past all the projections that you had set up for yourself, and you start to see the true beauty of the world and start to get that much closer to experiencing your soul and experiencing God. And that's why this is why shadow work is the integral, the necessary early steps that a person has to take. A lot of people want to jump in and start doing magic, start performing miracles, start, really changing the world, but they haven't even begun to change themselves. And that's what shadow work is all about. So I hope you enjoyed these last two videos. They'll be released together, and I will be doing another topic here soon. Take care. Have a good night.